On Arran, 9,000 metres of new hedges are planned for planting with the support of a new government grant that is available across Scotland. Farmers are increasingly interested in conservation and ways of building natural capital into their business, and at Dougarie Estate that has already begun.
Hi there, my name is Alec Perry. I'm an agricultural consultant in Ayr in the southwest of Scotland, and today we are over with the Net Zero Arran group on the Isle of Arran. And we're going to be taking another look at another really interesting project that they've got on the go, and we're going to be promoting the Nature Restoration Fund, which is being used by one of our participants to establish almost 9,000 metres of new hedging on the island. We've been working with Dougarie Estate, which we're going to see in a little bit, and as I've mentioned before, they have received funding through the Nature Restoration Fund from Scottish Government in conjunction with Nature Scotland to establish these 9,000 or so metres of hedges. So the idea behind what we're calling the Green Network project at Dougarie Estate is to link together habitats and fragmented areas on the estate that previously have never had any habitat connectivity. We recognise that Arran is a particularly important island for Scotland in terms of biodiversity conservation, and we want to create a habitat network that's diverse and works within the farmed environment, so that's what we're trying to achieve. The Nature Restoration Fund is supported and facilitated by Nature Scot on behalf of Scottish Government, and for some farmers and some crofters out there, you might think that you're familiar with the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme and that this will be something similar. In reality, the Nature Restoration Fund is much more of a capital grant. So think of it more in terms of the new entrant capital grant scheme that was available a number of years ago, except in this case, it's very much focused towards nature conservation and promoting sustainable land management. Under the Nature Restoration Fund, there are 5 funding priorities, and the first of which, being most important in the case of Dougarie, is habitat creation and connectivity. And hedges are, by a country mile, the poster child for habitat connectivity. Unfortunately, the estate was not eligible for hedge creation under the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, and so we saw an opportunity to utilise the Nature Restoration Fund, sometimes called the NRF, to facilitate the creation of these hedges. And 8,900 metres, 9,000 metres, thereabouts, that's a huge financial burden on the estate, so we recognise that we're utilising the grant and we're taking full advantage of that and the benefits that it'll bring. In a little while, we're going to hear from the likes of David Henderson, who is the contract farmer for the estate, and he'll give us a bit of an overview of what he's hoping to achieve. But in terms of what I'm hoping to see out of the Nature Restoration Fund is a diverse native hedge or hedges established across the estate. The estate has multiple farms, so we're going to be filming down at Macrae today, and we're also going to be at Auchingallen with William Semple, or Billy, who's there working with his team to put them in, and we'll also be hearing from him and what his perspective is on projects of this scale. So the Nature Restoration Fund is an environmental capital grant scheme that has been running for a number of years now. We're actually, at the time of filming, just in the middle of their expression of interest period for their Helping Nature Fund, which funds projects that are somewhere between £25,000 and £250,000, and the capital grant you can expect to achieve on that is anywhere up to 90%. It's easy to look at this episode that we're filming today and think, oh well, this is a grant for hedges, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the Nature Restoration Fund can be used for just about any project that is going to enhance nature conservation in Scotland. But important to say that the Nature Restoration Fund will fund projects that cannot be supported through other means. So in the case of something that could be funded under the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, or a scheme like Peatland Action or the Water Environment Fund, those items or those projects should be funded through those avenues. The Nature Restoration Fund focuses on bespoke nature conservation projects that don't neatly fit into any other existing framework. In terms of hedges, I love hedges. I think this is a terrific project for Dougarie Estate. I'm very pleased for them. I think that, you know, 8,900 metres of hedges is some going, and we're going to hear from William a little later on about that. But if successful, I think in the long term we're going to be looking at a much more dynamic landscape, particularly at Macrae and Auchengallen and High Dougarie, the farms that we're going to see a little later on. I'm really enthusiastic about what the outlook is for Dougarie in terms of their nature conservation. And I think that this grant scheme offers the potential for farmers to really demonstrate to Scottish Government that we're serious about nature conservation in farming, and given the tools and given the mechanisms, that farmers are prepared to invest themselves and to fundamentally, in some cases, change their landscape. The Nature Restoration Fund can be used for just about any project that is going to enhance nature conservation in Scotland. But important to say that the Nature Restoration Fund will fund projects that cannot be supported through other means. So in the case of something that could be funded under the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, or a scheme like Peatland Action or the Water Environment Fund, those items or those projects should be funded through those avenues. The Nature Restoration Fund focuses on bespoke nature conservation projects that don't neatly fit into any other existing framework. So when we're considering the overall benefits of a hedging project like this, there are really three factors that we want to be considering. And number one is, how are these hedges going to be integrated into the farmed landscape, and what benefit are they going to bring to everyday activity? So in the case of somewhere like Dougarie, they have a lot of sheep, and it's very important to maximise the grazing opportunity that they have at Macrae, at Auchengallen and at the other places that we're going to see today. So hedges and the associated capital offer them the opportunity to tighten up their grazing, to maximise the shelter for extreme weather conditions, and to really hone in on the potential of their improved pasture. Number two, we want to be looking at the nature conservation value of these hedges. Now, as a habitat in and of themselves, hedges are absolutely great for things like small farmland birds and small mammals. There's plenty of them on Arran here. And I think over time we're going to see the development of a really lush habitat and the connectivity of disparate habitats across the estate, which is really exciting. Finally, we know this is a huge priority for Scottish Government. We want farmers, crofters and landowners to be in a position to mitigate against some of the causes of climate change and to capture some of their agricultural emissions. And hedges offer a terrific opportunity to achieve that while maintaining a productive agricultural field, whether that's grazed with livestock or cropped. So that element of atmospheric carbon capture is really important, and as I mentioned, a huge opportunity for farms who might feel under pressure. You know, maybe planting extensive areas of woodland is not something that they can achieve. Know that hedges offer that opportunity to do your little bit for mitigating against climate change. So just to drive home the point here, the Nature Restoration Fund, we are going to see an example of a pretty extensive hedge creation project here, but other previous examples have been the establishment of hill tracks for public access, the creation of ponds, the clearance of rhododendron. I mentioned earlier on how the Nature Restoration Fund has funding priorities, and that habitat creation and connectivity is very important, but equally you could receive funding for projects that support the freshwater environment, or projects that support urbanisation, public access. You could also receive funding for the marine and coastal environment, which obviously is of huge interest to farmers on Arran. And you can also receive funding towards control of invasive and non-native species, which are not hard to find across Scotland.
Last time we heard from David, he was discussing how the climate change group on the island had impacted his business. But today we join him over at Dougarie Estate, where he has high hopes for how the Nature Restoration Fund can build the natural capital of the estate and support everyday farming.
Getting grant funding from Nature Scotland for putting in hedges and fences, it's going to be a big benefit to us here, especially there's no shelter. There's very little shelter around this farm, so the hedges in 3 or 4 years' time, once they start establishing, should give us a good cover for protection for lambing time and all that. The fencing will also make it easier for rotational grazing within the organic system. So that's the benefits we're going to see out it, plus obviously the environmental benefits that it's going to bring as well to the wildlife for the bigger, for the estate as a whole will be a benefit as well. people are definitely cutting back in fertiliser this year, or the last 2 or 3 years, just because of it. But also, maybe in years gone by, folk were using too much. They were reliant it was too quick a fix. So, especially through your net zero group, you're starting to see more folk applying lime, and you'll see the benefits that putting on lime and the fertiliser can bring to. So it is, in a kind of roundabout way, it'll benefit us eventually, because the high price makes you look to using other methods of grass growth. Yeah, with the new hedges, our fences and hedges, we should get better, easier management of the sheep, and better access to all the fields and that, so we should be able to set stock better, our rotation grazing better as well. Plus, the big benefit for us will be the shelter belts for the hedges, because as you can see here, it's pretty open. There's not much shelter here come an east wind or that. It's pretty open. Improving everything by a little bit makes the whole game better a wee bit. So we don't, you just try and do your best. It's not always as easy as you folk make out, but you try your best. The challenges we have faced on the island just now are obviously Calmac, the ferry situation, which seems to be getting worse and worse each week. We're struggling to get livestock in on and off the island, and also trying to get feeding into the island just now is a nightmare, because the boats, we're down to one boat, it's half capacity, and we just cannot get, if your boat's cancelled, you just lose your space, and then that's it. There's no priority given to anything like that. They do work a wee bit with us, but it's very challenging at the moment.
This scale of work is rarely taken on by the farmer themselves, but the scale is actually attractive to contractors like Billy Semple, who has taken on the planting of the hedges in Arran.
I like doing jobs this kind of size, because this is the size of job you want to do. It's a bit of a test here, but this is ideally the size of jobs I'd like to do. If the farmers are looking to do something like this, it's a great idea. They'll get new fencing, the hedgerows, because it's a pretty bare, and if they've got a chance to go for it, I'd advise them to go for it, because it's benefiting the countryside as well. I think it's all good having the hedgerows and everything all fenced off. It's loads of room for the wildlife, and they can nest and give them shelter. Also shelter the animals as well in the winter, especially here when the weather coming off the sea. Once the plants are grown up, it'll be a good barrier for them. I think with this project, the estate, they will have the only problems that we'll have is because they're going organic, can't use chemicals, so the trees might get crowded out with grass, and obviously a small percentage of them will die, but they can be fixed. It can be fixed. It can be replanted. It will need hand weeded probably. There'll be loads of bracken comes up, grass, so it'll probably all need hand weeded at some point, not long after it's planted. Sorry. This is beneficial to us because it gives us job stability, and the customers, when they get us and we're going to do it properly, everything's done as good as can be, and I expect everything to be done to a high standard, and if it's not, then we redo it, and we're not happy until the customer's happy.
I hope in watching this you'll realise that there's huge potential within the Nature Restoration Fund, and I would encourage farmers, crofters, landowners who are interested to get in touch with your local Nature Scot case officer and discuss your potential application for the future. So for those of you who might not know, the Net Zero Arran Group established itself in January 2020, and we have had a number of meetings aimed at reducing the island's carbon footprint at an agricultural level. And originally we launched with 12 members, and off the back of Scottish Government's beef efficiency scheme, we wanted to broaden out the carbon story and really dig down deeper into some of the data that the group were providing. So what we did was we came together as an island. We're now fortunate that we have 37 members on the island, so we've grown quickly over the 3 years that we've been active, but it's all been really good stuff. We have established what common factors are impacting farming at the local level on the island, and we've been taking collaborative, cooperative steps to deal with that. So some of the examples of what we've been doing have been in relation to whether or not the island should have a buying group. or whether or not we need to be investing in rush control and better management of our grasslands, and whether or not we need to be enhancing the farms for pollinators on the island, and broadening out the story from carbon into conservation, and the supply chain as well, a really important part of what's going on here in Arran. Arran has sometimes been referred to as Scotland in miniature, and we very much think that if we can provide a model here that works, then there may very well be a blueprint for other groups in Scotland to establish something similar, and to have that real kind of grassroots approach to climate change, to conservation, and to the promotion of sustainable farming. So thanks very much for joining us for this episode of FAS TV. Really good to be back on Arran with you, and I hope that some of you have been inspired by the Nature Restoration Fund and eager to give it a go. Let me just reiterate that anybody interested should get in touch with their local Nature Scot case officer and discuss what they want to do and how that fits into the funding criteria. But I wish you well, and hopefully we'll see you guys again on Arran.
We're at the start of March and many herds and flocks have already started calving and lambing, or if they've not yet, they're about to do so. So I hope the weather remains favourable for you. At this time of year, it's important to remember 3 key things to ensure your calves and lambs get off to the best start in life. So we want a clean environment, we want good colostrum intake, and we want navels to be treated. At this time of year, through our post-mortem rooms, every year we'll see lambs and calves that have died because they've picked up infection in the first few hours of life, very often from a calving pen or from a lambing pen. So it's really important to do everything we can to make sure these are as clean and as dry as possible. Many of the losses early on in life will be due to diarrhoea, due to scour, from agents such as rotavirus or crypto or maybe salmonella or E. coli. Now these are bugs that perhaps cows and sheep are carrying and not showing any obvious signs of disease, but if calves or lambs get these and they've got no immunity, then they're going to succumb to infection very quickly. All of these sorts of bugs are spread from the faeces and acquired in through the mouth. So we want to make sure that the calving pens, the lambing pens are clean as dry as possible, plentiful dry straw, and make sure that the teats of cows and ewes are as clean as they can be as well. If we minimise the challenge, hopefully we'll minimise the risk of scour to these calves and lambs. We know that colostrum is gold, and we know that lambs and calves are born with no antibodies at all, and so that's why it's vital that they get colostrum from their mothers as soon as possible. So when it comes to colostrum, remember the 4 Qs of colostrum. So we want quality, quantity, quickly and quietly, and in addition to that, I'd add cleanly. So a rough rule of thumb would be that we want calves and lambs to receive about 10% of their body weight within the first 6 hours of life, because after that the gut starts to close off and the antibodies can't be absorbed any longer. It's possible for us to check the quality of colostrum that your cows and sheep are producing, so speak to your vet about getting a colostrum quality check. It's also possible for us to get blood samples from calves and lambs in the first week of life to see if they've absorbed enough of these antibodies. So even if everything looks okay, it's perhaps good to get a check just to see everything is in order. Quality of colostrum can be checked by your vet to see that it's suitable, to see that there are enough antibodies there. It's also possible to do a blood test to see that calves and lambs have absorbed enough of that colostrum. So if everything is going well, the blood test is a good peace of mind. Equally, if the blood test shows that insufficient antibodies have been absorbed, then hopefully it'll let you address that. If colostrum from the calf or lamb's own mother is not available, then speak to your vet about what the next best option would be. Chances are frozen colostrum from your own farm would be best, perhaps followed by colostrum from another farm, but you'd need to consider what disease risks that could pose to your animals. There are artificial colostrum products available in the market, but these vary greatly in quality. So do speak to your vet about choosing the right one. Many of them are designed to be an addition, a supplement to colostrum rather than a colostrum replacer. So don't lull yourself into false sense of security thinking that they've had colostrum when it might in fact just be a supplement. The other thing to remember if you're using artificial colostrum is that that won't have the antibodies to the diseases on your farm, and it also won't have the antibodies if you've vaccinated. So if you've vaccinated against rotavirus, coronavirus, or against clostridial diseases, that powdered colostrum won't have the same antibodies that your own cows or ewes colostrum will have. Finally, it's really important to ensure that navels are treated appropriately. So the navel is a really easy open route in for infection that can track forwards to the liver or backwards to the bladder, or it can even set up a peritonitis within the abdomen. By using a product such as strong iodine, we can make sure that we dry up the navel and that there's antibacterial properties there to minimise infection. Every year through the post-mortem room we'll see calves or lambs that maybe have a splash of iodine perhaps to the side of the navel or down one leg, so that's not doing any good at all. So it's important that you take your time and do this job properly. If iodine is not available, I think there have been some supply issues, then speak to your vet about an alternative product. Using antibiotic sprays is not a good idea. It's not an appropriate use of antibiotics and it won't dry the navel sufficiently. There are other products that maybe contain chlorhexidine and alcohol that might be appropriate, but speak to your vet about the best choice. So throughout calving and lambing, make sure you remember these 3 key points of clean environment, good colostrum intake and navel treatment, and hopefully that will minimise your losses.